Looks like you may come across the flight deck. Coming in low, bridge wing level. Bridge wing level. Below the bridge wing. Below the bridge wing.
Its full impact may have been intended for a domestic audience, but there was more than a hint of menace in Putin's warning that any outside threat would be met with annihilation.
In an address to the Russian people today, Vladimir Putin claimed he's developed a new arsenal of weapons that the U.S. cannot counter. These include a nuclear-powered cruise missile, a hypersonic missile that can strike anywhere, and a nuclear-powered underwater drone.
The speech that had seemed relentlessly domestic suddenly took an explosive turn. No one expected Vladimir Putin's annual address to Parliament to involve advanced missile systems and strategic weapons, amid talk of job creation and better roads in the years ahead. It was a response, he said, to years of unchecked advances by the United States in missile defense.
There should be no doubt in anyone's mind that after the invasion of Georgia, the invasion of Ukraine, the intervention in Syria, the meddling in our election, the attack last week by Russian mercenaries on U.S. forces in Syria, that we are again in a Cold War. We are in conflict with Russia.
Russia has always been a big nuclear state. No one wanted to speak constructively with us in the past. No one wanted to listen. Well, listen to us now.
One missile in development, Putin explained, could travel the globe with unlimited range and entirely undetected by radar defense systems. Less than 3 weeks before the presidential election, it was all greeted with ecstatic applause by Russia's political elite.
Putin's new weapons may, in fact, really be able to evade Western missile defense systems. Putin also said, Sandra, that these weapons that he has just obtained do not exist anywhere else in the world. That has yet to be confirmed. But one highly respected Russian military analyst I spoke to earlier said that these weapons are for real and that the nuclear arms race is back on full scale. Now, Putin rolled out several videos this morning with computer animation to show these missiles, which he said were as fast as, quote, meteorites making their way to the Americas and around the world. Among the items, he described a nuclear-powered cruise missile and a nuclear-powered underwater drone. The weapons haven't all been named yet. He even suggested the Russian public write in their suggestions to the Ministry of Defense. Putin said these weapons were developed after the U.S. withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty when Russia was on its knees. So it had to figure out a way to defend itself. That Moscow's protestations about ditching the treaty were ignored by the U.S. The quote of the day, probably from Putin, was perhaps, quote, "Nobody listened to us, so listen to us now." He also said, after all the applause from the audience died down, "I hope this will, quote, sober up any potential aggressor."
After 18 years in power, this was Vladimir Putin reminding Russians that their country is a world power once again. The strength of its conventional military on full display in Syria, he said, its nuclear capabilities now soon to be more than a match for US might.
Recent reports suggest a U.S. airstrike against Syrian pro-government forces killed several hundred Russian mercenaries. One America's Christian Rose has more.
The doomsday clock moves even closer to midnight as a U.S. airstrike reportedly kills at least 200 Russian private military personnel in eastern Syria.
Just weeks before his all-but-guaranteed re-election, Russia's President Vladimir Putin gave his own version of a State of the Union address today. As Nick Schifrin reports, Putin used the occasion to show off new weapons that he says can defeat U.S. missile defenses and maintain a deadly balance with the United States.
President Vladimir Putin today unveiled a grand vision for his country's future and what he called the means to achieve it, new nuclear weapons.
No one wanted to speak with us constructively. No one has listened to us. You listen to us now.
He showed off animations of weapons he called Invincible, a hypersonic missile apparently capable of crossing continents in seconds, and a never-before-acknowledged nuclear-powered cruise missile, apparently that can slalom between missile defense systems that Putin considers a long-term threat.
Looks like you may come across the flight deck
Russia
coming in
and its
low.
allies will be perceived as a nuclear attack on our country. The response will be immediate.
Our nuclear triumph.
Putin's return to Cold War rhetoric comes 1 month after the U.S. announced its plans to deploy weapons. Putin said he was responding to American threats.
Bridge wing
The
level.
military strength of Russia is a secure guarantee of peace because this strength preserves and will
Below
always
the bridge
preserve
wing.
a balance of power.
Below the bridge
To
wing.
his surprise, Russian lawmakers responded with praise. President Putin once again made Russia a global superpower.
The theory about Russia as a regional superpower with a weak economy disappears from the American political thinking.
The speech took place just over 2 weeks before the Russian elections. Putin framed the U.S. as an adversary, only when we were strong enough to meet the challenge.
We turn now to Richard Burt. He was the chief U.S. arms control negotiator during the strategic arms reduction talks with the Soviet Union during the Reagan administration. He also served as Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. He's now at McCarty Associates, an international business consulting firm. Burt, thank you very much.
Good evening.
Is this all about politics, domestic politics? President Putin not worried about threats to Russia, but in fact, threats to his own power?
Well, part of it is certainly about politics. I mean, there's an election in March. Nobody's going to beat Vladimir Putin. But Putin wants to get a good chunk, 70% or more of the vote. And he can't talk about an economy that's rapidly growing. He doesn't have the kind of consumer economy that dominated the early part of this century. People's living standards are actually
Its full
falling.
impact may have
So
been
he's playing
intended
the
for a
great
domestic
power
audience,
card.
but there
He's
was
saying, "I
more than a
brought
hint of
Russia
menace in
back.
Putin's
We're a
warning that
global
any
superpower,
outside
and
threat would
our
be met
technology
with annihilation.
is first class. It can compete
In an address to the
effectively with
Russian
United
people
States,
today, Vladimir
and so
Putin
you can
claimed
rest
he's
easy.
developed a new arsenal of weapons that the U.S. cannot counter.
And let's look
These
at it
include a
from his
nuclear-powered
perspective for a
cruise
second.
missile,
He
a
says, look, you
hypersonic
withdrew
missile that
from
can
the
strike
ABM treaty, the
anywhere, and a
anti-ballistic missile treaty.
nuclear-powered
You're
underwater
creating missile
drone.
defenses
The speech that had seemed relentlessly domestic suddenly took an explosive turn.
You know, Putin's not entirely wrong.
No one expected Vladimir Putin's annual address to Parliament to involve advanced missile systems and strategic weapons amid talk of job creation.
Apple will go into it, only ever paid 1%, but we'll get into that in a bit.
Right, yeah, so this is all about bringing those jobs back to America, bringing the cash back to America. Trump just finished his first year in office, and this is some of the campaign promises that he made, and he's making good on those promises. It's really hard to criticize Trump because he's doing stuff he said he would do. This is obviously going to be a huge boom for jobs in the U.S. Are we going to start manufacturing in the U.S.? How incredible would that be if you start seeing iPhones and iPads or some other equipment actually being manufactured, not in China, not in Asia, but in the United States? I don't know if they're actually going to do that or not, but they're clearly bringing a lot of jobs, and they're going to build a whole new Apple campus. And I guess they're shopping for a city now where to put that new Apple campus. So this will be a $1 trillion company soon.
Yeah, they haven't made the specific announcement announcements of what these 20,000 jobs will be. It could all be at Apple stores for all we know, selling more products. In terms of their tax, so apparently they're paying a 15% tax on repatriated profits. It looks like they're going to repatriate, if you look at $38 billion, that's pretty much 15% of the $246 billion they have held overseas. So it looks like they're bringing it all back by those numbers. The article goes on to say that in June, Trump told the Wall Street Journal that Apple's chief executive officer, Tim Cook, had promised to build 3 big plants in the U.S. as part of a discussion about tax reform. The company is the latest to announce a one-off payment as a result of recent changes to U.S. tax law, which allows companies to pay a levy of 15.5% on overseas cash holdings that are repatriated to the U.S.
You know, I remember during the Reagan years, the trickle-down economics that was introduced, and there wasn't really a lot of trickle-down. But here, this is actually trickling down in real time. Trump announced a tax cut, and boom, 20,000 jobs from the biggest company in the world relocated to the U.S. or created in the U.S. That's a genuine job boom tied to a tax policy. Again, you know, this guy was a novice coming into office a year ago. I said, you know what, give him the ball, see what he does. All the professional politicians suck. You know, see what this guy can do. So far, it looks good.
Well, you know, one thing I want to say is that since the financial crisis and then President Obama came in, a lot of people, the Occupy Wall Street stores were like, you know, bankers got bailed out and then they were collecting all these big bonuses. They are the ones that actually are getting hit hard because of these the new tax reform, because they had massive losses in the 2008-2009 financial crisis, and they've been writing those off. So some of these guys, I think like Citigroup just announced that $22 billion they're going to have to hit on their profits this year because of this new tax reform, because they were counting on writing off all their big losses during their scams from the last crisis. So now they're going to be hit hard. So he's actually hitting them hard, unlike what we've seen in previous administrations.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You know, the tax laws carry forwards. They're going to be, you know, ended. So they've got a real, genuine bottom line event happening to them. And they're being penalized for making bad bets that led to the crash of 2008. Barack Obama applied zero accountability after the 2008 crisis. As a matter of fact, he just showered them with free money and said, oh, try to do better next time, guys. So, again, Trump's policy is actually inflicting a little pain to where it belongs, the banks.
So back to Apple, you know, the Panama Papers had showed that Apple had set up a complex web of offshore companies to basically pay less than 1% tax rate. And regarding that, the article mentions that in 2013, a Senate committee accused Apple of using a highly questionable web of offshore vehicles to avoid paying taxes in the U.S. Senator John McCain said his constituents were, quote, mad as hell to learn that the world's biggest company was paying tax rates that were sometimes lower than 1%. I've never seen anything like this.
That's across the board. All big industrial companies, all big Dow companies, S&P 5, their tax rates. Remember General Electric, we reported on this a couple of years ago. They did a 70,000-page tax return, and at the end of the process, they ended up with a tax credit. They got money back from the government. So any kind of tax reform like this that levels the playing field is going to be a boom to industry, to jobs. It's long overdue. I would imagine there'll be another tax reform bill next year. Just simplify it. Bring in a flat tax before he's all over and done with. Trump will bring in a 15% tax rate across the board, which would be the best possible solution to the tax, question in the U.S.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think obviously taxes have gone down on corporations. We already have a low tax on capital gains. So capital is very low taxed across the world. Labor is still taxed very highly. I saw somebody talking about this on Twitter this morning about these tax rates. And it is interesting to note that right now, labor is so cheap tax interest rates, capital is so low. So there should be some sort of mechanism whereby, we should make labor cheaper. We don't need to make capital any cheaper. There's already so much of it. That's why stock markets keep on going up 1,000 points in 12 days. So we don't need any cheaper, like a lower burden on capital at this point. We need a bit of a lower burden on labor, because labor, the top tax rate is still, well into the 30%.
Look, for 7 years, we've been preaching to labor that the solutions offered by government are insufficient. You must accumulate cryptocurrency. We started preaching this when Bitcoin was 3. Alt market was less than 50 million. It's now 500 billion, 600 billion, got as high as 800 billion. The way to fight against a lethargic government, if you want to build capital, is via crypto. We've been saying this for 6 years, 6.5 years, and we've been absolutely right. And I'm meeting people here at the North American Miami Bitcoin Conference who walk up to me and say, thank you for Kaiser Report in 2013, 2011, 2012. You've made me an industry. You've made me millions of dollars. I'm fighting against the banks. I'm fighting against governmental lethargy.
I do want to caution, it is quite, prices are much higher on all these cryptocurrencies than they were back in 2013. Bitcoin was down in the hundreds. It's
That's
now
not the point.
over
The point is that government is slow on their feet to move and for wages. And the way to fight back is via crypto. Of course, you have to enter it with your head up, but you have your own sovereignty. Don't rely on the government to provide sovereignty for you. They provide sovereignty for corporations, not labor. That's the message. We say for 7 years, if you've been standing on you waiting for better prices, you're going to, be waiting for the rest of your life. You'll never be a sovereign individual.
Yesterday in the last episode, you interviewed Ari Yu of Storm Token. So there are other ways to enter the crypto markets, by the way. You don't have to take your savings, take your cash and convert it to crypto and then, suffer the anxiety of the ups and downs of the crypto market, because it could be very volatile for a while. So with the likes of Storm Token, there are loads of platforms now where you can start to earn some crypto. That's where primarily all my early crypto was earned. So it does, I think, make it a little bit less emotional. I know for a fact that I feel more emotionally distraught over when I convert fiat to crypto and then the prices go down. The stuff I earned for my time, I exchanged my time, my labor for that. For the crypto, I feel less
Storm Token is a way to earn crypto. Also, there's still mining opportunities. On some of the altcoins, you can still mine altcoins, home mining, and you can do that whole... There's so many videos and so many resources. If you're not participating in crypto at this point, it's because you want to be poor.
Well, okay. I mean, there are different ways of thinking of it. Not just poor, but not wealth poor, but sort of sovereignty poor and freedom poor. We have to get a little bit outside of the whole, crypto bro sort of notion of we all have Lamborghinis and stuff. And
yeah, but interest rates are near 0%, and it's great for corporations, and it's great for those politicians that are benefiting from that. It's also great for those wanting to get into the crypto space, because the cost of capital has never been cheaper, and the cost of being in the space is never going to get any cheaper. But anyway, that's it for this first half from the North American Bitcoin Conference here in Miami. Stay tuned for the second half. A lot more coming your way.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, why would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows. And Q Larry. Question more.
If the sectarian and political polarization comes back, if they come back, then that will provide the right circumstances, the right environment for ISIS to re-emerge again.
Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser here at the North American Bitcoin Conference in Miami. Time now to turn to Marco Santori. Marco, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We've known each other for a number of years now. You're a veteran in this space. You're a lawyer.
Yeah, would you believe it?
You're a lawyer.
There's a couple of us.
Okay, so now you've specialized in Bitcoins and tokens and crypto for years. You're one of the very first people. You're a veteran in this space. Yeah. And now we're entering a new period called initial coin offerings. And it's always been a challenge in this space. There's always been a regulatory question mark from the very, very beginning. And so, Marco, tell us a little bit about what the challenges are now for ICOs as you see it.
Yeah. You know, now the regulator is SEC, right? This is what everybody's talking about. When token sales, well, before token sales, it was just Bitcoins, right? It was money services. If things got really exotic, it was Litecoin or Ether. And people were talking about a totally different area of the law, anti-money laundering, KYC. Now people are talking about securities laws, commodity derivatives laws, the things that, you know, people who have been in financial services for years, sort of secondhand to them. It's a second nature to them. But for entrepreneurs and technologists, this is brand new. So the issues are, am I selling a security? If I slip up and make some kind of misstatement, or I'm not able to, plan the entire path of this token sale, am I engaging in securities fraud? Brand new questions that technologists really haven't had to answer.
Right. I started my career on Wall Street, and it's a highly regulated environment. Yeah. And, at the beginning of the crypto space and Bitcoin space, the big question was, is it a commodity? Is it a currency? And no one ever figured that out definitively. I think the regulators are kind of coming down and calling it more of a commodity. I think the CFTC is looking at it more in those terms. But now with this ICO space, it clearly comes under the bailiwick of the SEC. And so are these ICOs ramping up their legal talent, and are they prepared for this, or is it a mismatch? And secondarily, the SEC seems like they're a bit accommodating somewhat, that they're letting some of the growth happen organically. What's your perception there?
I got to tell you, SEC has been in this space longer than most people realize. I remember back in 2013 sitting down with SEC, before there were token sales, before there were ICOs, just talking through, sitting down with SEC, talking through the basic issues of, this is the blockchain, this is how you can see what a UTXO is, this is the difference between a private key and a network address. They've been in this space for a long time, quietly, learning, which is what regulators ought to do. They haven't demolished the industry. The chairman has actually come out and said, look, some of these things are just not securities. They're things we're not going to regulate. He made it very clear that Ethereum, for example, with the ERC20 tokens, has a real use case, the network on which a lot of these token sales were built.
Let's talk Howey test.
Yeah.
Howey test, okay. What is it? Why is it important? Marco.
It's the test for what tokens are securities. It also happens to be the test for what plots of orange groves are securities. And so it's this really odd fit, right? People say, oh, it's really a square peg in a round hole. Or maybe it's a testament to sound principles-based regulation. But the reality is, this is a test from the 70s, right? This is a test from the 70s when someone tried to sell plots of land in an orange grove, but really not the plots themselves, just the profit from the plots. SEC said that's a security. Howey said, no, these are orange groves. SEC won that argument. And they came up with a test. The Supreme Court had a test for the Howey test. An investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profit, primarily from the efforts of others. And you take that test and you apply it to a token sale, and they're all different.
Right, and there seems to be more variations than allows in the Howey test. In other words, there's so many hybrids, if you will, in the space. And you're on the legal front. Is that part of what you're doing, is to try to sort through a lot of the minutia and the verbiage to come up, like, how does this fall? And
Absolutely.
How do you...
Absolutely. It's a facts and circumstances based test, which is sort of a legal way of saying it's a smell test. I'll know it when I see it. But at least, it gives flexibility to regulators who need flexibility in the world of changing facts. And it accommodates all of the weird stuff you see happening, like, well, I won't name any particular sales, but there's just this great variety. We're in the midst of this, like, Cambrian blossoming of all these different token models. Models for raising money, models for moving money around, models for representing assets that are not money as tokens so that they can be traded as freely as you could trade a Bitcoin.
Right, and where do you see Bitcoin in all this? Because, you know, that's the granddaddy of it all.
Yeah.
And it's got the biggest market cap still. And on the regulatory front there, different countries are taking different approaches. Some countries are trying to position themselves as the quote-unquote Switzerland of Bitcoin. They want to be pro-Bitcoin. They want to try to bring that business in-house. Some countries are afraid of it. Some countries like Venezuela are trying to adopt a blockchain technology, bring in their own crypto coin, the Petro, to circumvent sanctions. On the sovereign front, Marco, the big picture on the sovereign front, where do you see trends there?
So look, people have talked a long time about how Bitcoin is unregulated. Bitcoin is not unregulated. The protocol is unregulated, just like email is unregulated, but uses of Bitcoin, uses of Ethereum, uses of crypto in general are regulated based on how they're used. So at least here in the United States, and what I expect to see over the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, is the exporting of those regulations around the world, like the U.S. is frankly very good at doing, developing sound principles-based regulations, and let's face it, sometimes not sound, but by and large, you know, reasonable regulations, and joining G20 groups, joining the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, making sure that those laws become harmonized so that if you're doing business in the U.S., you can pretty much do business in the EU, or soon to be the UK, or some Asian countries, in pretty much the same way.
All right, so you fly in the highfalutin circles of this industry. You know, you're a very well-respected legal talent. People come to you, Marco. When you see a guy like Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, who was scoffing at Bitcoin, now he's done a mea culpa and said, I was wrong, I regret having said all those negative statements. Where are the banks today in the crypto space? Do they consider it a challenge? Are they trying to adapt? Are they confused still? Where are they now?
The banks couldn't care less. I'm telling you, the banks could not care less. And I confess, in 2012 and 2013, there were some undercurrents, some sort of social community undercurrents about how the banks were going to react. They were going to try to quash Bitcoin. They were going to try to get rid of it and make sure that it couldn't threaten them. It turns out the banks really aren't all that threatened by Bitcoin. They don't feel threatened, and I think realistically they aren't actually threatened. So when Jamie Dimon said, look, I think Bitcoin is a fraud, and then changed his mind later, I applaud that. I think, you know, somebody should change their mind based on new information. They should change their opinions based on new information. But when he did say Bitcoin is a fraud, I was quoted in the same FT article saying, look, that is the conjecture that Bitcoin is used for money laundering has been long disproven. It is it's just not a meme that has really aged well. Yes, Bitcoin can be used for money laundering. Yes, Bitcoin is used for money laundering. But every single government that has studied it has found the use of crypto for illegal activities to be relatively low.
Right, they have the graphs and plots that they study, you know, use, money laundering, what is used, and they have various fiat currencies, and they have various other, you know, commodities, and crypto weighs in.
It's always cash, prepaid cards, credit cards, a whole laundry list of things. And HMT in the UK, the UK Treasury just released another study that confirmed its study last year that crypto still ranks the lowest. It is an emerging threat, as regulators like to say. Yes, it's something to be on people's radar, but look, I mean, this demonstrably, this is not a criminal's.
It's hardly, it's a non-starter in that front in terms of percent. Now, when I was speaking earlier about Bitcoin, is it a commodity, is it currency? I saw your eyebrows furrow, as if to think, I read your mind, and you're like, wow, this guy is off base here somehow. Let me ask you, that debate about how does it fall in the category of, is it like some have called it a duck-billed platypus?
Yeah, right, it's the mammal that lays eggs.
Right.
Right.
Neither fowl nor...
The White House and the country learning of that new threat from Russian President Vladimir Putin, his nuclear warning to the world and to the U.S., and those images he used of missiles raining down on Florida. Putin declaring, you'll listen to us now.